What 6 words could a 9-year-old accidentally say that would get their mom arrested within hours? My mom has misophonia, which basically means sounds made her want to die. Not metaphorically. Literally. When I was 6 and fell off my bike, I made the mistake of crying. She stuffed a dirty dish rag in my mouth to shut me up. That's when I learned to be silent. By the time I turned 9, I'd mastered the art of existing without sound. I'd change out of my pajamas in the school bathroom because zippers were too loud. I'd practiced opening doors so slowly that the hinges wouldn't creak. But apparently, that wasn't enough for my mom. On my 9th birthday, she handed me what looked like a report card with empty rows. "It's your quiet point system," she said, smiling like she'd just given me a puppy. The thing was, I'd noticed the sticky notes on all our food for weeks. Numbers on everything. Bread, 2 points. Milk, 3 points. Meat, 10 points minimum. Now it all made sense. I had to earn points through silence to buy food. The scariest part? I hugged her thinking she was doing me a favor. I was 9 with big brown eyes and thought this was normal. Plus, staying quiet meant not triggering her episodes. So really, what was different? If only I knew the system would lead to those 6 words. The first day actually went perfectly. I woke up silently, got ready without a sound, and when I came home from school, Mom was beaming. She handed me my report card with 30 points, written in huge letters with hearts all around it. I could afford dinner. I chose steak because I'd earned enough points and hadn't had meat in weeks. That steak changed everything. And I mean everything. Because Mom overcooked it. At the time, I didn't realize it was on purpose. Every bite required aggressive jaw work, and if you know anything about misophonia, mouth sounds are the worst trigger. I tried everything. I produced extra saliva to soften it. I chewed in slow motion. After 5 minutes on one piece, my jaw ached so badly I discreetly spit it into a napkin. That's when Mom exploded. "I heard that! I heard you spit. Eat it now." But as I did, my tongue clicked against the roof of my mouth. Just once. That clicking sound, to someone with misophonia, it was like a gunshot. The room went dead silent. "You disgraceful bitch!" Mom slammed her fists on the table so hard the plates jumped. She grabbed my report card and held it over the stove burner until it caught fire. "You think you can make me suffer?" She grabbed my wrists and pulled my hands toward the flame. "This burning is only 20% of what I feel when you make noise." She didn't actually burn me. She stopped just close enough that I felt the heat. But something inside me broke. Not because of the pain, because I couldn't even cry. Crying makes noise. So I went to bed silent, my stomach eating itself. The next morning, I checked the point system. I was in negative points. The tongue click had cost me everything. Mom explained I couldn't eat until I earned back to 0. "It's only fair," she said, sipping her coffee while I watched. Day 1 without food, I was just hungry. I spent every second trying to earn points. I didn't flush the toilet. I didn't turn on lights. 2 more days until those 6 words would come out. By day 3, my stomach had stopped hurting and started feeling hollow, like my body had given up asking for food. I watched other kids eat lunch and genuinely couldn't remember what food tasted like. In PE, I got dizzy during jumping jacks and had to sit down. The nurse asked if I'd eaten breakfast. I nodded because technically I'd eaten 3 days ago, and lying would get me in trouble with Mom. 1 more day until everything would end. Day 3, I knew something was really wrong. My vision kept going black around the edges. My legs felt like those wobbly toys that collapse when you push the button underneath. During math class, I stood up to sharpen my pencil and the world tilted sideways. I don't remember hitting the floor. I don't remember the kids screaming. What I remember is waking up 20 seconds later, surrounded by faces, and my brain wasn't working right. The teacher was asking something, but all I could think about was how loud I'd been falling. How many points would that cost? How many more days without food? And that's when 6 words destroyed everything. "Please don't starve me anymore, Mom." The room went silent. Different from Mom's angry silence. This was horror silence. My teacher's face went white. She carried me to the counselor's office herself. The counselor handed me a chocolate bar, banana, and Feastables bar. I ate so fast I gagged, chocolate still in my mouth as I shoved in a banana. When I finished, I looked up. She had tears running down her face and her phone in her hand. "Sweetie," she said, her voice shaking, "I need you to tell me about the points." I explained everything, thinking I was in trouble for falling so loudly. Instead, she made another call, then another. Within an hour, people in suits showed up. By the time school ended, Mom was in handcuffs. But while they were dragging her out, she said something that made me beg them to uncuff her. And they looked like they were going to listen. Mom's voice cut through the parking lot air, loud enough that I heard it through the office window. "She needs me. She has special needs. Without me, she'll make noise and get hurt." The officers holding her arms paused, and one of them looked back toward the building where I stood pressed against the glass. My whole body moved before my brain caught up, running to the door, pushing it open, my voice coming out in gasps. "Wait! Please! She's sick. She can't help it. Please don't take her." I was halfway across the parking lot when the counselor caught me, her hands gentle on my shoulders, pulling me back. The officer closest to Mom shook his head and kept walking, and that's when Mom started screaming my name over and over until they put her in the back of the police car. I stood there shaking, watching the car drive away, and the counselor guided me back inside without saying anything. The office felt different now, like all the air had been sucked out. The teacher who carried me here stood in the doorway, her face still white. The nurse hovered near the desk. Two kids I recognized from the hallway pressed their faces against the small window in the door, staring. My hands wouldn't stop shaking because I'd just broken the biggest rule, the one that mattered more than all the others. I'd made noise. I'd told. I'd ruined everything. Even though Mom wasn't here, I felt like she could somehow hear me. Like the walls had ears and they were all reporting back to her, tallying up points I'd never be able to earn back. The counselor crouched down until her face was level with mine, and when she spoke, her voice was so gentle it made my chest hurt in a way I couldn't name. Sweetie, you did nothing wrong. You hear me? Nothing. She stood up and opened her desk drawer, pulling out a chocolate bar, a banana, and another candy bar, setting them on the desk in front of me like an offering at a shrine. I stared at them for 3 full seconds, my brain trying to calculate the points, trying to figure out if this was a trick. Then my hands moved on their own, grabbing the chocolate bar, ripping the wrapper with my teeth because my fingers were shaking too hard. I shoved half of it in my mouth and barely chewed, just swallowed, and then I was eating the banana, chocolate still smeared on my face, not even peeling it properly, just biting through the peel in spots. The counselor made a small noise, and when I looked up, she had tears running down her face and her phone pressed to her ear. She was talking quietly to someone, saying words like emergency, and 3 days, and collapsed. And I kept eating because if I stopped, I might remember how to feel scared. The candy bar disappeared next, wrapper and all almost, and then my stomach cramped so hard I doubled over. The counselor hung up and rubbed my back while I gagged, but I kept the food down. I had to, because who knew when I'd be allowed to eat again. Within 20 minutes, 2 people in regular clothes walked into the office and showed me badges that said, Child Protective Services in big letters. The woman had short dark hair and kind eyes, and the man carried a notebook. They pulled chairs close to me and asked if I could tell them about the points, about the food, about how long this had been happening. My voice came out in whispers because talking still felt dangerous. Like at any second, Mom would burst through the door and catch me making noise. The man wrote everything down in his notebook, his pen moving fast, while the woman kept saying, "You're so brave," and "You didn't do anything wrong," which confused me because I definitely made that tongue click, I definitely cost myself all those points, I definitely deserved what happened. But I kept talking anyway, explaining about the sticky notes on the food, about the report card Mom burned, about the 3 days without eating, about the steak that started everything. The clock on the wall ticked toward 3 o'clock, and through the window I could see other kids getting picked up by their parents, walking to cars and buses like this was a normal day. Then I saw Mom's car pull into the parking lot, right on time like always, and my whole body went cold. She got out and walked toward the building, her purse over her shoulder, her face calm and normal like she was just here to pick up her daughter from the school. The CPS people saw her through the window and the woman touched my arm. "Stay here, okay?" They went outside and I watched through the glass as they approached Mom in the parking lot. Her face changed in stages, like watching a time-lapse video. First confused, eyebrows pulling together as the CPS woman showed her badge. Then angry, her mouth moving fast, her hands gesturing. Then scared, her eyes going wide, her whole body seeming to shrink. She looked right at me through the glass, and even from this distance I could see tears running down her face. Her mouth moved, forming words I could read. "Please help me." My whole body wanted to run to her, to take it all back, to say I was lying, to say I made it all up, to fix this and make everything go back to normal. The counselor's hand landed on my shoulder and kept me in my chair, kept me from moving, and I watched Mom's face crumble as a police officer walked up and started talking to her. The CPS man came back inside and sat with me in a different room, a smaller office with a couch and some books. He explained that Mom couldn't take me home right now, that they needed to make sure I was safe, that I'd stay somewhere else tonight while they figured things out. I nodded because I didn't know what else to do, but inside I was screaming that I wanted my mom even though I was also terrified of going back to that house, back to the sticky notes and the point calculations and the constant fear of making sound. The words got stuck in my throat and came out wrong. "Is she going to jail?" The CPS man's face was careful. "Right now we're just making sure everyone is safe. Can you tell me more about how the point system worked?" I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and opened the Notes app where I'd been tracking my points for months. He leaned forward as I showed him screen after screen. The rules I'd typed out, the food costs I'd copied from Mom's sticky notes, the running total that had been negative ever since the tongue click. He took my phone and started photographing every screen and I could see his jaw getting tighter with each picture. When I explained that bread costs 2 points and meat costs 10 points minimum, he had to leave the room for a minute. Through the door, I heard him talking to the woman in a low voice, and when he came back, his eyes were red. They took me to the hospital emergency room even though I said I felt fine now after eating. The doctor was a woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun, and she examined me under bright lights that made me squint. She took my weight and I saw her write down a number that made her frown. Then she ran blood tests, sticking a needle in my arm while asking careful questions about the last time I ate before today. I told her 3 days ago and she asked what I ate then, and I had to explain about the steak and the tongue click and going negative. When the results came back, she sat down on the rolling stool and explained that my body was starting to eat itself, that the blood tests showed dehydration and signs of malnutrition, that another few days could have caused serious damage to my organs. She used words like ketones and electrolytes that I didn't understand, but I understood the look on her face, the one that said I'd been close to something really bad. While I was still at the hospital, the CPS woman came back and told me that Mom was interviewed at the police station. She said Mom was explaining that the misophonia makes normal sounds feel like physical pain, like her brain is being attacked, that the point system was her way of trying to protect herself while still taking care of me. The woman's face made it clear she didn't think this was a good excuse, her mouth pressed into a thin line, but I felt a weird relief knowing Mom was trying, even if she did it wrong. At least it meant she wasn't just being mean for no reason. At least it meant the pain was real, even if the solution was wrong. Late that night, after the hospital and more questions and paperwork I didn't understand, they drove me to a house I'd never seen before in a neighborhood across town. The streetlights were different here, brighter and newer, and the houses had yards with actual grass instead of dirt patches. A woman named Isabel Ramirez answered the door and welcomed me inside, and her voice was warm but not too loud, careful in a way that made me think someone had told her about Mom's condition. She showed me a small bedroom that would be mine for now, with a bed that had a purple comforter and a desk by the window and posters of bands I didn't recognize. Everything felt too loud. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. A clock ticked on the wall. Isabel's footsteps creaked on the floorboards as she walked. I stood frozen in the middle of the room trying to calculate points I didn't even owe anymore, my brain automatically assigning values to every sound, adding them up, watching my mental total drop into deeper and deeper negative numbers. Isabel said something about being tired and needing rest, and then she left me alone in the room with the door half open. I didn't sleep that first night because the house made sounds I'd trained myself to fear. The heating system clicked on around midnight and I flinched so hard I bit my tongue. A car drove by outside and I held my breath until it passed, counting the seconds. Isabel's adult daughter Phyllis walked to the bathroom at 2 in the morning, and I counted every footstep, 14 there and 14 back, my brain automatically cataloging each noise and assigning point values that no longer mattered. The toilet flushed and I lost 10 points. The sink ran and I lost 5 more. By morning, I'd mentally lost 50 points even though no one was keeping score, even though the system didn't exist here, even though I was supposed to be safe now. The next morning, someone knocked on the front door and I heard Isabel answer it. The CPS investigator from yesterday came into the living room where I was sitting on the couch, still wearing the same clothes because I didn't know if I was allowed to use Isabel's washer. She sat down across from me with a folder full of papers and started explaining what happens next. There would be court hearings and investigations and meetings with lawyers, and I would have someone called a guardian ad litem, who would help make sure my voice was heard. She used words like protective custody and safety plan that sounded important but didn't really mean anything to me yet. I nodded at everything she said, even though I only understood one thing. I couldn't go home, and I didn't know when I would see Mom again. The investigator kept talking about timelines and procedures, shuffling through papers and pointing at sections I was supposed to read, but the words just looked like black marks on white paper. When she finally left, Isabel made me breakfast without asking if I wanted any. Just put a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me like it was normal. Later that afternoon, the phone rang and Isabel answered it, then held it out to me. The school counselor's voice came through the speaker asking how I was feeling and if I needed anything. Hearing her made me cry for the first time since this whole thing started, actual tears running down my face while I held the phone. She asked what I needed, and I wanted to say, I need my mom and I need to know she's okay, and I need to stop feeling guilty for telling. But instead I just said, I'm fine because that's what I always say. The counselor told me the whole school was thinking about me, and that my teacher saved all my homework so I wouldn't fall behind. After we hung up, I went to my temporary bedroom and sat on the purple bed staring at the wall. That evening, alone in that room with the door half closed, I let myself remember the steak incident in full detail. I saw Mom's face twisted in rage, her eyes wide and her mouth pulled back showing her teeth. I felt the heat from the stove flame getting closer to my hands, the way the air got hotter and hotter until my skin felt like it was already burning. I heard her voice saying the burning was only 20% of what I feel when you make noise. The memory made me angry in a way I'd never let myself feel before, a hot feeling in my chest that spread through my whole body and made my hands shake. This anger scared me because good daughters aren't supposed to be angry at their mothers, even when their mothers hold their hands over fire. On the third day, the CPS investigator came back with more papers and sat down with me at Isabel's kitchen table. She told me that my teacher had submitted a written statement about things she'd noticed over the past year. Apparently, I'd started eating lunch in the bathroom instead of the cafeteria. I'd stopped participating in class discussions even though I used to raise my hand all the time. I'd lost noticeable weight since September, enough that my clothes hung loose on my body. The teacher wrote that she'd called home twice to talk about these concerns, but Mom had explanations for everything. Learning that an adult had noticed but couldn't help made me feel both validated and abandoned at the same time. Someone saw that something was wrong with me, but they didn't know how to fix it. The investigator kept talking, explaining that Mom had been calling the CPS office multiple times asking to talk to me, but they weren't allowing contact yet. She asked if I wanted to speak with Mom, and my answer got stuck in my throat. Part of me was desperate to hear her voice and know she was okay, to tell her I was sorry for getting her in trouble. But another part remembered her face when she held my hands near the flame and thought maybe I was safer with the silence between us. I told the investigator I didn't know, which was the most honest answer I could give. That night, Isabel made spaghetti for dinner and just put a plate in front of me without asking for points or permission. I stared at it for a full minute, my fork in my hand but not moving, waiting for someone to tell me I hadn't earned it. The noodles sat there getting cold while I tried to figure out what I was supposed to do. Isabel noticed me frozen and said, "Honey, you can eat whenever you're hungry here." I took one bite and then another, and the absence of fear tasted better than the food itself. By the end of the first week, I learned there would be an emergency protective hearing, where a judge would decide if I could go home or needed to stay in foster care longer. The investigator explained that Mom would be there with a lawyer, and I would have my own lawyer called the guardian ad litem, who only cared about what was best for me. The hearing was scheduled for next week, and the waiting made my stomach hurt in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. Alone in my room that night, I found an old phone that Isabel had given me for emergencies, and I opened the voice memo app. I pressed record and started talking about the point system, about being hungry, about the tongue click and the burned report card. Hearing my own voice say these things out loud made them feel more real than they had in my head. I saved the recording and labeled it what actually happened because I was scared I would start doubting my own memories. The next day, the CPS investigator picked me up with a police officer in the car, and we drove to my old house to collect evidence. Walking up to the front door felt wrong, like I was trespassing in a place that used to be mine. We went inside and found the sticky notes still on all the food in the kitchen. Bread 2 points, cheese 5 points, chicken 15 points. The investigator took photos of everything while I stood in the doorway feeling sick. In the trash can, they found the remains of my burned report card, the edges charred black, but you could still see 30 points written in Mom's handwriting with hearts drawn around it. Seeing that physical evidence made everything undeniable. Mom's arraignment happened a few days later, and I wasn't there, but the investigator came to Isabel's house afterward to tell me about it. She said Mom's lawyer had argued that her misophonia was a recognized medical condition, and that she was trying to manage a genuine disability, not intentionally harm me. The prosecutor called it systematic child abuse regardless of the reason behind it. The judge set bail and ordered Mom to have no unsupervised contact with me, which meant she couldn't see me alone or come to Isabel's house. Hearing this made me feel both relieved and guilty, like I'd done something wrong by telling the truth about what happened. The next afternoon, a woman knocked on Isabel's door and introduced herself as Bridget Gilmore, my guardian ad litem. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and explained that she was a lawyer, but she worked for me, not for the state or for Mom. She asked what I wanted to happen with the case, and I opened my mouth, but nothing came out because what I wanted was impossible. I wanted Mom to be okay, and I wanted to never be hungry again, and those two things felt like they couldn't both be true. Bridget must have seen something on my face because she leaned forward and said it was okay to want both things, that life wasn't usually as simple as picking one side. She left me some papers to look over and said she'd check in again soon, and after she left, I went to my room and closed the door. Late that night, I couldn't sleep, so I grabbed the notebook paper Isabel had given me and started writing a letter to Mom. I wrote that I was sorry for making the tongue click, sorry for getting her in trouble, sorry for not being quiet enough, and my hand was shaking as I filled the first page. But then I wrote that I was so hungry and so scared, and I didn't know what else to do, that my body was shutting down, and I thought I might die if I stayed silent one more day. 3 pages later, I stopped writing and stared at what I'd done, and I realized I was never going to send it because these words were just for me to get out of my head. I folded the pages and hid them under my mattress where no one would find them. When I returned to the school the following Monday, everyone stared at me in the hallway, and the whispers stopped when I walked by. My best friend Anna saw me at my locker and looked away quickly, pretending she was busy with something else. At lunch, I sat alone at a table in the corner with my tray of food, and the empty chairs around me felt both lonely and familiar, because being alone was something I knew how to do. The counselor checked on me twice during the day, poking her head into my classroom with a concerned smile, and my teacher gave me a smile that was trying too hard to be normal. In my first session with Opal Menard, the therapist, she handed me a piece of paper and asked me to make a list of normal sounds and rate how they made me feel. I wrote down doors closing, people chewing, zippers, footsteps, and next to each one I put scary or dangerous or costs points. Opal read my list carefully and explained that my brain learned to be afraid of sounds because of Mom's reactions, and that we could teach it to feel safe again, but it would take time. She didn't promise it would be easy or fast, and I appreciated that she wasn't lying to make me feel better. Over the next few days at Isabel's house, I started noticing the difference between being hungry because I hadn't eaten and being hungry because I was waiting for permission to eat. I could go to the kitchen whenever I wanted, but I still found myself calculating points and waiting for someone to say yes. One night, Isabel caught me standing in front of the open refrigerator just staring at the food inside, and she gently reminded me that I didn't need to ask, that food wasn't something I had to earn anymore. 3 weeks after everything started, Mom's lawyer sent a message through the CPS investigator saying that Mom was starting treatment for her misophonia with a specialist and attending therapy twice a week. The message said Mom wanted me to know she loved me and never meant to hurt me, that she needed help and was trying to get better. Reading this made me want to forgive her immediately and run back home, but Bridget came over that evening and warned me that love and safety aren't always the same thing. Bridget explained the conditions for supervised visitation in detail, telling me we would meet at the CPS office with a social worker present, that Mom couldn't discuss the case or the point system, and that I could end the visit at any time if I felt uncomfortable. She asked if I wanted to see Mom, and I said yes before I could talk myself out of it, and we scheduled the visit for next week. I spent every day until then feeling like I might throw up, my stomach tight and my hands sweaty whenever I thought about sitting across from Mom again. I recorded another voice memo on the phone Isabel gave me, this time talking about the things I used to be good at, like moving silently, and opening doors without sound, and eating without making my jaw click. I explained how these felt like survival skills, like I was mastering something important, but now I was learning they were just symptoms of being controlled. Saying this out loud helped me understand that being quiet wasn't an achievement. It was a prison I'd built around myself to stay safe. At my medical follow-up appointment, the pediatrician weighed me and checked my blood work again, and she said I'd gained 4 pounds in 3 weeks and my vitamin levels were improving. She asked if I was eating regular meals and I nodded, feeling a weird pride that my body was getting better even though my brain still felt broken. She scheduled another appointment for a month from now and said to keep doing what I was doing. At the school the next day, I was walking to my locker when I overheard 2 kids talking near the water fountain, and one of them said, "I got my mom arrested and ruined her life." The other kid said his parents told him I should have just dealt with it instead of making such a big deal, that all parents have rules. The words hit me like a punch in the stomach, and I spent the rest of the day wondering if everyone thought this was my fault, if I really did overreact to something that wasn't that bad. I went straight to my room at Isabel's house when I got home from the school and didn't come out for dinner. Isabel knocked around 7 and found me sitting on the floor with my back against the bed, crying in that silent way I'd learned years ago where no sound comes out even though my whole body shakes. She sat down next to me without saying anything at first, just being there, and eventually I told her what I'd heard at the school about ruining Mom's life and overreacting. Isabel listened to the whole thing, and then she told me about her sister Rosa, who stayed married to a man who hit her for 8 years. She said everyone kept telling Rosa that marriage was hard work, that she needed to try harder, that maybe she was too sensitive about a few arguments. Isabel's voice got quiet when she explained how Rosa finally left after he broke her arm, and even then people said she was breaking up the family over one mistake. She looked at me and said that sometimes people blame the person getting hurt because it's easier than admitting bad things happen to regular kids in regular houses on regular streets. She said if they admitted I was telling the truth about real abuse, they'd have to wonder about other kids they know, other families that look normal from outside. Her words didn't make the hurt disappear, but they made it feel less like something wrong with me, and more like something wrong with how people think. The next afternoon, Bridget came over with a notebook and her phone to help me get ready for maybe having to talk to the judge. She explained we were going to practice like it was a play, with her asking questions a judge might ask and me figuring out my answers. We sat at Isabel's kitchen table and she started with easy ones about my name and age and school, then moved to harder ones about the point system and being hungry. She taught me it was completely okay to say I don't know or I don't remember if I wasn't sure about something, that making up answers was worse than admitting I didn't have one. After we practiced for about 20 minutes, Bridget pulled out her phone and said we should record it, so I could hear how I sounded. She asked me to explain the point system like I was telling the judge, and I talked about the sticky notes on food and earning points through silence, and going negative after the tongue click. When she played it back, I expected to sound scared or shaky, but instead my voice was steady and clear, just stating facts about what happened. Listening to myself describe it in that calm way made me feel stronger than I thought I could be. Like maybe I really could do this if I had to. 2 days later, the CPS investigator came by with a folder full of papers she'd found while going through all of Mom's stuff at our house. She spread them out on the coffee table, and I saw notebooks I recognized from Mom's desk, the ones with the floral covers she always kept private. The investigator explained that the point system didn't just appear 3 years ago when I was 6. It started as something smaller, just a chart on the refrigerator for quiet time rewards where I could earn stickers. She showed me pages from the oldest notebook with dates and simple tallies, then later notebooks where the rules got more detailed and the penalties got bigger. By the most recent notebook from last month, Mom was tracking every single sound I made with point deductions that made it nearly impossible to stay positive. The investigator pointed to entries where Mom wrote things like, tongue click during dinner, minus 30 points, no food until earned back, and coughed during movie, minus 15 points, lost breakfast privilege. Seeing it all written down in Mom's handwriting proved this wasn't some sudden breakdown or one bad moment. It was a choice she made over and over, getting worse bit by bit until I was collapsing from hunger. Learning this made the betrayal cut deeper because it meant she had years to stop, years to choose differently, but instead she chose to make the system tighter and meaner. The morning of the supervised visit, I woke up feeling sick to my stomach and couldn't eat more than 2 bites of the toast Isabel made. Bridget came over early to remind me about our signal, touching my left ear if I needed a break or wanted the visit to end. She made me practice it a few times, reaching up casually to touch my ear, and just knowing I had that escape route made the whole thing feel slightly less scary. I tried practicing what I might say to Mom, running through different versions in my head, but everything sounded either too angry like I was attacking her, or too apologetic like I was sorry for telling. I couldn't find the middle ground between those two feelings because I was stuck between wanting to scream at her and wanting to hug her. The night before the visit, I couldn't sleep, so I got out the notebook Isabel had given me and started writing another letter to Mom. This time I didn't hide behind saying sorry or explaining my side. I used the word you over and over. I wrote you held my hands near the fire and I felt the heat on my skin. I wrote you watched me get dizzy in PE and didn't care that I was starving. I wrote you made me believe that existing, just being alive and making normal sounds, was something I had to earn through perfect silence. The words felt dangerous coming out of my pen, like I was breaking a rule by being direct, but they also felt true in a way my other letters hadn't. Even though I knew I wouldn't send this one either, wouldn't let Mom read these angry, honest words. Writing them made me feel like I was standing up straight for the first time in years instead of making myself small and quiet and sorry. The supervised visit happened in a small room at the CPS office that smelled like old coffee and had uncomfortable plastic chairs that squeaked when you moved. A social worker sat in the corner with a clipboard, writing notes about everything we said and did. Mom looked smaller than I remembered, like she'd shrunk in the weeks since I'd seen her, and her voice came out soft and careful. She told me she was sorry, that the misophonia had made her sick in her brain, that she never wanted to hurt me even though she did. She cried and reached across the table for my hand, and when I let her take it, her fingers felt cold and shaky. She said she was going to therapy twice a week now, and seeing a special doctor for the misophonia and the treatment was helping her understand how wrong the point system was, how she'd let her illness control her choices. For a few minutes, I felt that familiar pull to forgive her completely, to say it was okay and we could go home together. Then Mom's voice changed, got a little harder around the edges even though she was still holding my hand gently. She said the investigators were making this whole thing seem worse than it really was, that I knew she loved me, and maybe I could tell them it was just a misunderstanding about the rules. She squeezed my hand and her eyes went pleading and desperate, and I felt myself wanting to protect her, to fix this, to take back my 6 words and make everything go back to how it was before. The social worker shifted in her chair, and the sound made me remember that before meant being hungry, before meant calculating points for every breath, before meant collapsing on the classroom floor. My left hand moved up to my ear almost like it wasn't my choice, like my body made the decision before my brain could. The social worker stood up immediately and asked if I needed a break, and I nodded even though Mom was saying, "Wait, please." I didn't mean it like that. We stepped out into the hallway and the social worker told me I did exactly the right thing, that recognizing when someone is trying to manipulate you is really hard, and stopping it is even harder. My hands were shaking so bad I had to squeeze them together, but I also felt proud somewhere under the scared feeling, proud that I'd used my signal, that I'd chosen to protect myself instead of making Mom comfortable. After the visit ended and Mom left with her lawyer, Bridget took me to a quiet room and pulled out some printed papers about misophonia treatment. She showed me information about sound therapy where people learn to tolerate noises better, and cognitive behavioral therapy that helps change how the brain reacts to triggers, and even medications that can help manage the condition. She explained that Mom's disorder was real, that the misophonia genuinely caused her pain when she heard certain sounds. But that didn't excuse what she did to me because plenty of people have misophonia and they don't starve their children. Seeing all these treatment options that existed, that Mom could have tried years ago instead of creating the point system, helped me separate 2 things I'd been mixing up: loving her and excusing what she did. I could love my mom and still know she made terrible choices, could want her to get better while also knowing I couldn't live with her right now. That night in my room at Isabel's house, I opened the Notes app on my phone where I used to track my points obsessively. I started a new list, but this time instead of logging sounds I'd made and points I'd lost, I wrote down sounds I actually liked. I listed birds chirping outside my window in the morning, the fan in Isabel's living room that made a steady hum, distant traffic from the highway that sounded kind of like ocean waves, and Phyllis humming while she cooked dinner. Writing these down felt like taking back something Mom had stolen from me, like sounds could be neutral or even good instead of just dangerous things that cost points. I kept adding to the list, remembering the sound of rain on the roof, and Isabel's laugh and the school bell that meant lunchtime, and each one I added felt like proof that the world was bigger than the silent prison I'd been living in. Back at the school the next week, we had to plan group presentations for science and everything went wrong so fast. My group had 4 people and they all started talking at once about who would do what part, and someone dragged their chair closer with this horrible scraping sound against the floor, and papers were rustling as everyone pulled out notebooks, and the noise built up like layers of sound pressing against my brain. I tried to focus on the worksheet in front of me, but the words blurred together and my chest got tight like someone was squeezing it from the inside. The room started spinning and I couldn't get enough air no matter how hard I breathed, and my hands started shaking so bad I had to put them under the table. One of my group members asked if I was okay, and I tried to answer but no sound came out, and then the teacher was there asking if I needed to step outside. I nodded and she walked me to the counselor's office where they have this quiet room with soft lighting and a beanbag chair. I sat there for 20 minutes doing breathing exercises the counselor taught me, feeling like a complete failure because I thought I was getting better, but apparently I wasn't. The counselor came in after a while and sat with me, not saying much, just being there while I pulled myself back together. When I finally felt steady enough to talk, I told her I thought the panic attack meant all my progress was gone, that I was broken in a way that couldn't be fixed. She reminded me that 3 weeks ago I was starving, and now I'm having normal reactions to stress, which improvement even if it doesn't feel like it. At my next session with Opal, she taught me this grounding technique that's supposed to help when I feel overwhelmed. 5 things I can see, 4 things I can touch, 3 things I can hear, 2 things I can smell, 1 thing I can taste. We practiced it over and over until I could run through the whole sequence without her having to prompt me. She had me identify the blue chair, the clock on the wall, the plant in the corner, the tissue box, and the window as my 5 things to see. Then I had to actually touch 4 things: the soft couch fabric, the cool metal armrest, my own jeans, and the smooth wooden table. For 3 sounds, I picked the air conditioner humming, cars outside, and Opal's pen clicking. 2 smells were harder, but I found the vanilla candle she always has burning, and my own shampoo smell from this morning. One taste was the mint gum I'd been chewing earlier that still had a tiny bit of flavor left. Opal explained that healing isn't a straight line going up, that having a bad day doesn't erase all the progress I've made. She pulled out a piece of paper and drew this zigzag line going generally upward, but with lots of dips and rises, and she said that's what real healing looks like. The panic attack at the school was just one dip in a line that's been mostly going up since I left Mom's house. She reminded me that 3 weeks ago I was literally starving, and now I'm having anxiety responses that lots of kids have, which means my brain is starting to process normal stress instead of just survival stress. A few days later, Bridget called to tell me that Mom's lawyer had reached out through official channels with a plea deal proposal. Mom would plead guilty to child neglect, which meant admitting in court that what she did was wrong. The deal included completing a whole treatment program for her misophonia with specialists who know how to help people manage it without hurting others. She'd also have to attend parenting classes for a full year to learn appropriate discipline and how to take care of a kid properly. The supervised visitation would continue, and Mom couldn't have any unsupervised contact with me for at least a year, maybe longer depending on how the treatment went. Bridget explained that the prosecutor was okay with this deal because it meant Mom accepted consequences and got help, but we'd avoid a trial that would be really hard on everyone. She asked what I thought about it, and I had to sit with that question for a minute because my feelings were all mixed up. I told her I didn't want Mom to go to jail because that felt too scary and final, but I also couldn't live with her right now, and maybe not for a long time. The plea deal seemed like it gave Mom a chance to get better while keeping me safe, which was the best option even if it wasn't perfect. That night in my room, I started a new project on my phone. Instead of tracking points or even listing sounds I liked, I started recording voice memos about food memories that had nothing to do with the point system. I talked about the birthday cake from when I was 6, before the point system started, when Mom made this chocolate cake with rainbow sprinkles, and I got to eat 2 pieces. I described pizza parties at the school where we'd all sit together and nobody cared about chewing sounds or napkin noises. I recorded a whole 3-minute memo about the time Grandma made chocolate chip cookies before she died, and how she let me eat the dough even though Mom said it would make me sick, and how the cookies came out perfect and warm. Each memory I recorded felt like I was deleting the point ledger from my brain, taking up that mental space with something better. It was like overwriting bad computer programming with healthy files, replacing the constant point calculations with actual good memories about food being enjoyable and safe. The CPS investigator came to Isabel's house a few days later with Bridget, and they brought more evidence to show me. The investigator had photos of the burned report card that they'd recovered from our trash and pieced back together like a puzzle. You could still see Mom's handwriting where she'd written 30 points, in huge letters, and the hearts she'd drawn all around it before she held it over the stove flame. Looking at those hearts made my stomach hurt because it showed how proud she'd been of me right before everything went wrong. The investigator explained they'd documented everything, including the sticky notes on all the food and the notebooks where Mom had tracked my violations for years. Bridget said this evidence would be really important for court because it proved the psychological abuse alongside the physical neglect, showing that Mom had created this whole system to control me, instead of it just being a one-time mistake. Seeing the physical proof made it impossible to pretend it wasn't as bad as I remembered, because there it was in photos and documents that other people could see too. At the school the next week, my teacher set up what she called a restorative conversation with the 2 kids who'd said I got Mom arrested. The school counselor sat with us in a small conference room, and the teacher explained that this was a chance for everyone to understand what really happened. The kids admitted they didn't actually know the details, and were just repeating what their parents had said at home. I explained, using the simplest words I could find, that I wasn't allowed to eat for 3 days, and that's why I collapsed on the floor. I told them the point system meant I had to earn food by being completely silent, and when I made one small sound, Mom took away all my points, and I went negative so I couldn't eat until I earned them back. I watched their faces change as they realized this wasn't about strict rules or me being picky about food. One of them said sorry, and actually looked like he meant it, and the other one nodded but looked uncomfortable, like he was understanding something he didn't want to be true. 2 weeks after the first supervised visit, we had another one at the CPS office. Mom tried a completely different approach this time. She suggested we sit together in complete silence to prove that she loved me even without words, that we could exist peacefully and quiet together. The social worker looked concerned, but she allowed it after checking with me that I was okay to try. We sat there for 10 minutes while Mom smiled at me like this was bonding, like sitting without talking was the same as having a relationship. I realized she was still trying to make silence the solution to everything, still putting her need for quiet above my need to exist like a normal person who makes sounds. This felt like another test, like she was checking if I could pass by staying quiet and proving I understood her condition. The social worker ended the visit a few minutes early and told Mom that future visits would need to include normal conversation and interaction. In my next therapy session with Opal, I told her about the silent visit and how weird it felt. She asked me what word I would use to describe what Mom did to me with the point system and the starvation. I'd been dancing around it for weeks, calling it the situation, or what happened, or the thing with Mom, but never saying the actual word. Opal just waited, not pushing but not letting me off the hook either, and finally I said it. Abuse. The word felt too big when I said it out loud, like it was meant for other people's situations that were worse than mine, but it also felt too accurate, like it fit exactly what had happened even though I didn't want it to. Saying abuse out loud made it real in a different way, made it something I couldn't take back or soften or explain away. Something fundamental shifted in my understanding when I named it, like I'd been looking at a picture that was slightly blurry and suddenly it came into focus. Over the next few weeks, Bridget helped me write an impact statement for the court. She asked me questions about how the point system affected me, what it felt like to be hungry, what I was scared of, what I wanted for my future. We worked on it together over several sessions at Isabel's kitchen table, and Bridget let me edit every single word until it felt completely true. The statement talked about being so hungry my stomach stopped hurting and just felt hollow. It described being scared to make any sound, even breathing too loud. It explained how I learned that my existence was conditional, that I only got to eat if I earned it by being quiet enough. The last part talked about what I wanted, which was to feel safe eating food without permission and making normal sounds without calculating costs. Reading the finished statement back made me cry, but it also made me feel heard in a way I hadn't felt before. Someone was finally writing down exactly what happened to me in words that made sense. I started practicing reading my impact statement out loud into my phone's voice recorder. The first few times my voice shook so bad you could barely understand the words. I'd get through maybe 2 sentences before I had to stop and breathe and start over. But I kept doing it, recording take after take, listening back to hear how I sounded. By the 5th recording, my voice was steadier. By the 8th, I could get through the whole thing without stopping. By the 10th take, I sounded like someone who knew what happened to her was wrong, someone who wasn't apologizing or making excuses. Listening to that version of myself, the one who could say these things clearly and mean them, felt like meeting someone I wanted to become. That stronger voice belonged to a girl who survived something terrible and was learning to talk about it, and even though I wasn't all the way there yet, I could hear her in those recordings getting closer with each try. 3 days later, a delivery person knocked on Isabel's door with a package addressed to me. Isabel brought it to my room and watched as I opened it, and inside were these really expensive noise-canceling headphones, the kind that cost like $200. There was a card tucked inside that said, "So you can have peace and quiet whenever you need it. I love you always," in Mom's handwriting with little hearts drawn around the edges. I just stared at them for a minute because part of me wanted to put them on immediately, and another part felt sick looking at them. Isabel called Bridget to come over, and when she arrived, they both looked at the headphones like they were something dangerous. Bridget picked up the card and read it out loud, then set it down carefully on my desk. She said Mom was still making everything about silence and quiet, still not understanding that I needed to learn sounds were safe, not find better ways to block them out. Isabel nodded and said the gift felt like another form of control, like Mom was trying to fix me instead of fixing herself. I put the headphones in my closet behind some old shoes and closed the door, and that felt like the right choice, even though I felt guilty about it. The next morning, the social worker came by for our weekly check-in, and I told her I needed to set a boundary. My hands were shaking while I said it because setting boundaries with adults still felt wrong, like I was being mean or ungrateful. I explained that I only wanted contact with Mom through supervised channels from now on, no more packages or notes that didn't go through official review first. The social worker wrote this down in her notebook and asked if something specific had happened, so I told her about the headphones and how they made me feel. She said this was a very healthy boundary, and that she'd communicate it to Mom's lawyer right away, and she'd make sure everyone involved in the case respected my wishes. Bridget, who was sitting next to me on Isabel's couch, touched my shoulder and reminded me that protecting myself wasn't the same as being cruel. She said I could love Mom and still need space from her, that both things could be true at the same time. The social worker agreed and added that my safety and comfort had to come first, especially right now while I was still healing. I nodded, but I still felt like I was doing something wrong, like good daughters shouldn't need protection from their mothers. Later that week, the CPS investigator called and asked if she could stop by to share something she'd discovered. When she arrived, she had a folder full of papers that turned out to be my school records going all the way back to kindergarten. She spread them out on Isabel's kitchen table and started pointing to different notes that teachers had written over the years. One from 1st grade said I was unusually quiet during group activities. Another from 2nd grade mentioned I was withdrawn during lunch periods. My 3rd grade teacher had written that I seemed anxious about making mistakes and hesitant to participate. The investigator said these concerns had been filed but never investigated deeply, never put together into a pattern that might have revealed what was happening at home. Looking at all those notes made me feel angry in a way I hadn't expected. I wasn't just mad at Mom anymore. I was mad at the system, at all the adults who had noticed something was wrong but didn't dig deeper, didn't ask the right questions, didn't connect the dots. The investigator said she was angry too, that the system had failed me by not seeing what was right in front of them. She said they were using my case to review their reporting procedures, to try to make sure other kids didn't fall through the cracks the same way I did. That night in my room, I opened my phone's voice recorder again, but this time I didn't practice my impact statement. Instead, I recorded a new memo and addressed it to the system, to all those teachers and counselors and mandated reporters who had written notes but never acted. I talked about what it felt like to be a kid who needed help but didn't know how to ask for it, who had learned to be so invisible that even when people noticed something was wrong, it wasn't enough to save me. I described how I'd mastered the art of taking up no space, of existing without evidence, of making myself so small and quiet that I could disappear completely. I asked why no one had put together all those small signs, why it took me literally collapsing from hunger before anyone truly saw what was happening. My voice got stronger as I kept talking, and I felt like I was advocating for other kids who might be suffering in quiet ways right now, kids whose warning signs were being written down but not acted on. When I finished recording, it was 12 minutes long and my throat hurt from talking so much. I saved it and labeled it "For the System," even though I didn't know if anyone would ever hear it besides me. 2 weeks before the scheduled hearing, Bridget called to say we had a pre-hearing conference at the courthouse. She explained that all the lawyers would meet with the judge to discuss options before the actual trial date. Isabel drove me there and we sat in a small conference room with Bridget while other lawyers and officials came in and out. The prosecutor was there, and Mom's lawyer and the judge who would be handling the case. They talked about Mom's plea deal that was on the table. The prosecutor explained that if Mom accepted it, she would have to admit to child neglect, complete a year-long treatment program for her misophonia, attend parenting classes focused on appropriate discipline, and have only supervised visitation with requirements to show sustained behavior change before any custody discussion could happen. Bridget said the alternative was going to trial, which could take months and would require me to testify in detail about everything that had happened. The judge asked questions about the treatment program and what kind of monitoring would be in place, and Mom's lawyer talked about how Mom was already making progress in therapy. I sat there listening to them discuss my life like it was a case file, using words like petitioner and respondent instead of daughter and mother. The whole thing felt both important and distant at the same time, like I was watching it happen to someone else. After about an hour, the judge turned to Bridget and asked what I wanted. Bridget glanced at me and I nodded, giving her permission to speak for me. She explained that I had chosen to submit my written impact statement rather than testify in person at the hearing. She said I wanted Mom to get help and I wanted to be safe, but I didn't want to sit in a courtroom and recount every detail while Mom watched me. The judge listened carefully and said this was reasonable, that my statement would be read into the record during the hearing, giving me a voice without requiring me to be in the room for the hardest parts. He said protecting me from additional trauma was important, and that the court would respect my choice. Hearing him say this made me feel like someone was finally listening to what I needed, like my comfort actually mattered. Mom's lawyer started to object, saying Mom had a right to face her accuser, but the judge cut him off and said I wasn't an accuser. I was a child who had been harmed, and the court would prioritize my well-being. The prosecutor nodded in agreement and made a note in her file. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep, and Isabel found me sitting at the kitchen table at midnight. She sat down across from me and asked if I wanted to talk about tomorrow, but I shook my head because talking about it made it feel too real. Instead, she suggested we plan something small and quiet for afterward, regardless of how the hearing went. She said we needed something to look forward to, something normal and calm that would remind me the world was bigger than courtrooms and CPS offices. We decided we'd get ice cream from the place down the street, and then come home and watch a movie. Something funny that didn't require thinking too hard. Just having this plan made my chest feel less tight. Like tomorrow wasn't the end of everything. Just another step in a long process. Isabel squeezed my hand across the table and said she was proud of me, that what I'd done by speaking up took more courage than most adults ever had to show. I went back to bed and actually managed to sleep a few hours, which was better than I'd expected. The adjudication hearing started at 9 in the morning at the family court building downtown. Isabel and Phyllis came with me, and we were told I could wait in a separate room while the legal proceedings happened. The room had uncomfortable plastic chairs and old magazines, and through the wall I could hear muffled voices from the courtroom. Every 20 minutes or so, someone would come to update me on what was discussed. First, the prosecutor presented evidence. Then Mom's lawyer gave his opening statement. Then they called witnesses, including my teacher and the school counselor. The waiting felt endless, each minute stretching out while my future got decided by people in suits talking about statutes and best interests. Phyllis tried to distract me with a card game, but I couldn't focus on the rules. Isabel just sat next to me with her hand on my shoulder, not trying to make it better, just being there. Around 11, Bridget came in and said they were getting close to the part where my impact statement would be read. At 11:30, Bridget came back to get me and asked if I wanted to stand outside the courtroom door while my statement was read. I said yes because even though I didn't want to be in the room, I wanted to hear my own words being spoken out loud in that official space. We walked down the hallway and stood just outside the courtroom entrance. Through the door, I heard the guardian ad litem introduce herself and explain that she would be reading my impact statement on my behalf. Then she started reading and I heard my words about the point system, about the burned report card with hearts around 30 points, about Mom holding my hands near the stove flame, about going 3 days without food until my body started eating itself. I heard her read the part about collapsing in math class and saying those 6 words that changed everything. My hands started shaking, but the rest of me felt steady, like these words were doing the work I needed them to do. The guardian ad litem's voice was clear and strong, not emotional but not cold either, just factual and true. When she finished, there was silence in the courtroom for a few seconds before the judge spoke. Then it was Mom's turn. Her lawyer called her to the stand and she pleaded guilty to child neglect with all the agreed conditions. She had to say it out loud, had to admit that she'd neglected me, that the point system was wrong, that she'd failed to provide adequate food and care. I heard her voice crack when she said guilty, and then she started crying, these loud sobs that carried through the door. Part of me wanted to run in there and hug her, tell her it was okay, make her stop crying the way I'd always done before. But I stayed where I was, standing in the hallway with Bridget's hand on my shoulder, and I realized I didn't feel that automatic pull to comfort her. I felt sad that she was crying. I felt bad that this was happening, but I didn't feel responsible for fixing it, for making her feel better, for taking back my words to stop her pain. The judge accepted the plea and outlined the terms again, making everything official. Mom would start the treatment program within 2 weeks, supervised visits would continue on the current schedule, and there would be a review hearing in 6 months to assess her progress. When it was over, Bridget turned to me and said it was done, that I was safe now, that the court had put protections in place. We walked back to the waiting room and Isabel stood up, ready to take me home. Back in the courtroom, the judge started reading through a thick stack of papers that outlined exactly what would happen next. She explained that I would stay with Isabel for now, that this wasn't temporary anymore, but a real placement until things changed. She listed specific things Mom had to do before visits could increase, like completing a full treatment program for her misophonia and taking parenting classes that taught her about appropriate discipline and child needs. The judge talked about food security measures, how CPS would check on me regularly to make sure I was eating enough and gaining weight properly. She mentioned mandatory therapy for me too, weekly sessions with Opal to help me process everything and learn that sounds were safe. Hearing all these protections spelled out in official language made something tight in my chest loosen slightly, like maybe the system was actually working to keep me safe instead of just reacting to what already happened. Then the judge did something I didn't expect. She ordered the school district to review their reporting procedures because teachers had noticed warning signs for months, but nothing happened until I collapsed. She said adults had failed to connect the dots and that needed to change, so other kids wouldn't slip through the cracks the way I almost did. After the hearing ended, the social worker brought me to a small conference room where Mom was waiting with her lawyer. This was supposed to be our goodbye before the new restrictions started, one last supervised visit under the old rules. Mom looked smaller somehow, like she'd shrunk since the last time I saw her. She sat across the table from me and didn't try to reach for my hands or hug me right away. Her lawyer stood by the door while the social worker sat in the corner with her notebook. Mom's voice came out quiet and shaky when she finally spoke. She told me she was sorry, that she understood why I couldn't come home, that what she did was wrong even though her brain made normal sounds feel like attacks. She said the misophonia was real, but it didn't excuse starving me or holding my hands near the fire or making me earn food through silence. This was the first time she'd admitted fault without adding a bunch of reasons why it wasn't really her fault, without trying to make me feel bad for her or explain how hard things were for her. The honesty felt strange and real at the same time, like maybe she was actually starting to understand what she'd done, instead of just being sorry she got caught. I didn't hug her because my body didn't want to, didn't feel that automatic pull to comfort her the way I used to. But I told her I hoped the treatment helped and I meant it. Hoped she could get better even though I wasn't ready to trust her or live with her again. My next therapy session with Opal happened 3 days later in her office with the comfortable chairs and the box of tissues on the side table. She asked me to think about the 6 words that started everything, the ones I screamed in math class when my brain wasn't working right from hunger. We talked about how those words, "Please don't starve me anymore, Mom," were probably the loudest sound I'd ever made in my whole life. Not because of volume, but because of what they did. How they broke through years of forced silence and made everyone see what had been happening behind closed doors. Opal helped me understand that naming what was happening to me, even in a moment of complete desperation when I thought I was dying, gave all the adults around me permission to finally act. Those 6 words made the invisible visible, turned my private suffering into something other people could witness and respond to. She said sometimes the most important sounds we make aren't planned or careful, they're just truth spilling out when we can't hold it in anymore. I realized that tongue clicks and crying and zipper sounds never mattered as much as I thought they did, that the only sound that actually saved my life was my own voice saying what was true. Over the next few weeks, school started feeling more normal as other kids found new drama to talk about and mostly stopped staring at me in the hallways. My teacher did check-ins every few days, but they felt supportive instead of like she was waiting for me to break down or mess up. She'd ask how I was doing, if I needed any help with homework, if there was anything making me uncomfortable in class. I started raising my hand again to answer questions without that constant fear that speaking would cost me something or get me in trouble. The words came easier now, like my throat remembered how to make sounds without calculating the consequences first. In one of our regular meetings, the counselor told me she was reducing our sessions to once a week instead of every day because I was showing real progress in managing my anxiety and learning to trust people again. She said I was doing the hard work of healing, and it showed in how I moved through the school day, how I talked to other kids at lunch, how I participated in class discussions without freezing up. Isabel started teaching me to cook on Saturday mornings, simple stuff like scrambled eggs and grilled cheese and pasta with butter. We'd stand in the kitchen together and she'd show me how to crack eggs without getting shells in the bowl, how to butter bread before putting it in the pan, how to tell when pasta was done by testing a piece. Making food without calculating points or asking permission felt completely different from anything I'd experienced before, like I was learning a new language that I'd never been allowed to speak. The first time I burned the grilled cheese slightly, leaving black marks on the edges, I froze up and waited for someone to yell about wasted food or assign penalties. But Isabel just laughed and said that's how you learn, that everyone burns things when they're starting out. She scraped off the burned parts and we ate the sandwiches anyway, and nobody mentioned consequences or mistakes or having to earn the right to try again. The CPS investigator called Isabel's house one afternoon to give us an update about Mom. She said Mom had been attending all her treatment sessions with the misophonia specialist, going twice a week like she was supposed to, and the therapist reported that she was engaging seriously with the work instead of just showing up to check a box. The supervised visits would continue on the same schedule we had now, once every 2 weeks at the CPS office with a social worker present. There would be a review in 3 months to see if Mom's progress was real and lasting enough to consider increasing contact. Hearing that Mom was actually trying made me feel 2 different things at once. Part of me felt hopeful, like maybe she could get better and learn healthier ways to manage her condition. But another part felt wary and careful, like I was allowed to want her to improve without having to trust her yet, or pretend everything was fixed just because she was going to therapy. Isabel drove me back to my old house one Saturday morning with the CPS investigator following in her own car. Walking through those rooms felt surreal and disconnected, like I was visiting a museum of my own life instead of a place I'd actually lived. The kitchen where I'd stood calculating points for every bite of food, the table where the steak incident happened, and Mom held my hands near the flame, my bedroom where I'd gone to sleep so many nights with my stomach eating itself. Everything looked the same, but felt completely different now that I knew it was wrong, that other kids didn't live this way. I packed my clothes into garbage bags, grabbed my books and stuffed animals and the few toys I cared about. In the living room, I found one photo of Mom from before everything got bad, from when I was maybe 6 or 7, and we were smiling at the camera. I took it and put it in my bag, not because I forgave everything that happened, but because she was still my mom, and that was complicated and messy, and I didn't have to choose between loving her and protecting myself. That night, Isabel made steak for dinner and asked me how I wanted mine cooked. The question confused me for a second because I'd only ever had steak one way, overcooked and tough and impossible to chew without making sounds. Isabel explained the different options and I said medium because I'd learned from cooking shows that's how steak is supposed to be, tender and easy to eat. When she put the plate in front of me and I cut into the meat, it was completely different from what Mom had served. The knife went through easily, and the first bite melted in my mouth, soft and flavorful, and nothing like the punishment version I remembered. I felt something release in my chest as I chewed, this understanding that food was supposed to be nourishment and pleasure instead of a test I could fail. This was what normal eating looked like, what it felt like to have a meal without fear or calculations or the threat of consequences hanging over every bite. I sat at the desk in my room at Isabel's house and pulled out notebook paper to write one more letter to Mom. This one was shorter than all the others I'd written and never sent, and I actually planned to give this one to the social worker to pass along. I told Mom I was doing okay, that I was learning to eat without fear and make sounds without panic attacks. I explained that I needed her to keep getting help and doing the work in therapy before we could have a real relationship again, not just supervised visits where we sat across a table being careful. I wrote that loving her and protecting myself could happen at the same time, that I didn't have to choose one or the other. I could want her to get better while also keeping myself safe, could hope for her recovery while not being ready to trust her yet. At the bottom, I signed it your daughter, because that was still true even though everything else had changed, even though I was living in a different house and learning a different way to exist in the world. 3 months after the hearing, Bridget called to give us an update about Mom's progress. She'd completed the first phase of her treatment program, the intensive part where she met with specialists multiple times a week and learned new coping strategies. Her therapist had submitted a report to the court saying Mom was developing healthier ways to manage her misophonia, that she was starting to understand how the point system had been abuse, even if it felt like protection to her at the time. The supervised visits would continue on the same schedule for now, with the possibility of increasing to once a week if Mom kept making progress. But there was no timeline for me returning home, no date circled on a calendar when everything would go back to normal. Bridget reminded me that this was good news without being pressure, that Mom getting better was a separate thing from whether I was ready to live with her again. I could be glad she was improving while still needing more time and more proof before I felt safe going back. In my next therapy session, Opal handed me a blank piece of paper and asked me to split it down the middle with 2 columns. She wanted me to write what felt better now on one side and what still hurt on the other, and I sat there staring at the empty page for a minute before I started. On the better side, I wrote having enough food, sleeping without fear, making sounds without calculating costs, and having people who believe me. The pen moved faster as I added each item, like my hand knew these truths even when my brain still doubted them sometimes. On the still hurt side, I wrote missing the mom I thought I had, feeling guilty for the consequences she's facing, and worrying that I'll never feel completely safe anywhere. When I finished and pushed the paper across to Opal, she read both columns carefully, and then looked up at me with this expression that wasn't pity or disappointment. She said both lists were true, and that's what healing looks like, holding multiple truths at once without having to choose just one. I could be glad I was safe and still miss my mom. I could know the point system was wrong and still feel guilty about the consequences. These things could exist together in my brain without one canceling out the other. On a random Tuesday evening a few weeks later, I was alone in my room at Isabel's house doing homework when I started talking out loud to myself about my day. I complained about the math problems being too hard, laughed about something funny that happened at lunch when Anna tripped over her backpack and sang part of a song I heard on the radio that morning. My voice filled the room without anyone coming to shush me or count points against me or tell me I was too loud. The walls just absorbed the sound like it was normal, like I had every right to exist with noise and take up space in the world. I kept talking, testing the silence that didn't punish me, and for the first time in years I felt like maybe I was going to be okay.